Let's talk to employment lawyer David Martyn from Thompson's and Sam Owens, the author of Happy Relationships, 7 Simple Rules to Create Harmony and Growth. Hello to both of you.
Morning, John.
Sam.
Hello.
Sam, are you there? Is it okay to have a relationship with somebody at work?
It depends on the company's guidelines at the end of the day. And of course, lots of people do meet partners at work. But of course, it does bring into question a number of things. For example, is it ethical? Are you taking advantage of being in a position of power, how that may sway people into being submissive. But also, it's very difficult if the relationship does break down, even if it's consensual, even if the company is okay with it, it can be a very tricky area to tread.
So on balance, you think it's a bad idea?
It depends on the situation.
Right. Thank you for that. Yeah, blunt. David, obviously McDonald's, it was the rules.
Yeah.
This was a divorced man dating a woman, and it was consensual sex, but she was in a position subordinate to him. Therefore, there's a power play here.
Yeah.
Certainly, McDonald's viewed it as a power play. Talk about the law around this.
Yeah. I think the first thing to say is that he's probably in quite an exceptional position in comparison to most of us. He's the chief executive of McDonald's, and as we understand it, actually he wasn't dismissed in the traditional sense. He was effectively voted out by the board. Also, this is America, and the rules are slightly different. But in summary, there is no absolute prohibition on you having a relationship.
We don't have these rules here.
Yeah, we don't have an absolute prohibition on you having a relationship with someone at work. However, a number of companies, and I think probably increasingly companies, will have in place, particularly for managers, rules and guidance around disclosure. And I think that's probably the most important issue here is if a relationship is going to take place, then it's, I would think, perfectly legitimate for the employer to say, well, okay, we know you spend 80% of your working life with these people. You're probably going to enter into relationships with them. But when you do, for everyone's protection, we should have a mechanism where the manager themselves can disclose that the fact of the relationship's taking place.
It's none of the company's business.
Well,
surely if two people at work are having a wee fling, it's none of the company's business.
Well, that is probably right if those two people do not work closely together, but you can very easily imagine a situation where you've got a manager and a subordinate. The manager's conducting appraisals, has a lot of say in the way that person's career is going to develop. They may even be deciding on that person's bonus for the year. It really is then the company's business whether or not those two people...
That's what I do to get a bigger bonus. That's...
So it does depend on circumstances, but actually to some extent it's both sides. It's the employee who is perhaps in a more junior position. If the relationship doesn't go well, then there is a real scope for some of the intimacies in the relationship to be used against the more senior manager. But obviously there's a much more obvious difficulty with a senior manager who's trying to use their power to curry the affection of a more junior member of staff.
But Sam, it would seem, in a sense, the most natural thing in the world. If you're working with someone, and you may not have met them in other walks of life, but if you work with people and you're spending a lot of time with them, that relationships blossom, and not just maybe a fling, it could be a serious relationship and people end up getting married. I mean, surely that's, as John says, not a company's business, because it seriously impacts on your life and the decisions that you make. If they have a policy and you enter into a relationship, one of you might have to move jobs or lose your job, and that's not right, is it?
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, we do spend so much of our time in the workplace. And so one of the challenges with that is that is what you're experiencing real? And is it really that you're being, for want of a better word, groomed in a way? Because at the end of the day, if you're spending a lot of time with somebody, research shows that when we build emotional intimacy for both men and women, that leads to a greater sexual desire. So first and foremost, it's important to just be aware that what I feel is real in the workplace may not actually be real outside of the workplace. It may just be because of the environment that we're in, which is very intimate and close and a lot of contact hours. And then, in terms of it dissolving afterwards, there are so many issues here, just as the gentleman mentioned, that, personal information could be used against you. You could be bullied in a very subtle way, and then may feel that you can't speak up. So it's such a difficult one, because at the same time, we don't want to say to people, don't have relationships at work, because some people do end up very happily married as a result of them.
Yeah, and I think think some numbers at the weekend I saw was nearly half of all marriages end in divorce anyway. 40% of all marriages end in divorce. So just talk to anybody out there who's thinking of having a relationship at work, or maybe is in a relationship with somebody at work and they're keeping it secret. What are the things you have to look out for? And how do you tiptoe through this?
So be very aware that what you're getting from the relationship is actually what you're looking for long term, because it is such a tricky situation that you're putting yourself into. It's got to be worthwhile. So is it that it's just fulfilling an emptiness for you, and therefore maybe the gains won't outdo the losses at the end if it doesn't work out?
Are you saying, sorry to interrupt, but are you saying that if two people are of equal status, you don't need to worry? That's, two producers having a wee fling, that's okay. But if it's a manager and a trainee, that's different.
No, what I'm saying is you have to ask yourself what it is that you're getting out of the relationship. If it's really serious, assuming for a moment that it's ethically moral in terms of the company's guidelines and you don't need to disclose it, that's absolutely fine. But at the end of the day, there are so many pitfalls at the end of it if it doesn't work out, that you have to work out, is it really worth delving into this relationship and continuing it further if it's just a bit of a fling and just a bit of fun?
Well, that's every relationship. That's every relationship you've ever had in your life. You have to think, is this worth it? Is this right? Am I actually liking this person because I like them? Because how do you tell if anything's real?
People get into relationships for different reasons, don't they? Some get into them because they are just looking to fulfill an emptiness or a bit of loneliness, but they don't really tick the boxes in terms of somebody they want to spend their life with.
Okay, let me bring David back in. David, you said earlier on it's not enshrined in law. There's not much law around this in Scotland, but there will be law around the inappropriate use of positions of power to gain an advantage by using your sex, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's about, is there consent in the relationship? And if you are someone in a position of power and you're using that power to persuade somebody, potentially against their will, to do something which they otherwise might not want to do, then clearly that is not something which has been done consensually. And I think this is where perhaps Me Too, and we see a lot of cases at the moment around sexual harassment at work, and that's something which I think companies should be very, very conscious of, because people are much happier to speak up now. Relationships which end badly or perhaps start slightly, but there's a question around the extent of the consent for one party in the relationship. If that is in a workplace, then it is a matter which the employer has to consider, because potentially the employer could be liable for any harassment which take place at work or at work events, after work drinks. So it's that kind of thing is certainly something that employer needs to take into account.
When David, you mentioned the Me Too movement, and especially in corporate America, it seems to be it's being more scrutinised. I mean, the boss of Intel had to step down last year as well for a similar case. They broke the company's rules. Do you think there'll be more scrutiny, I suppose, even in this country? And people, do you think they'll be put off maybe having a relationship at work because they think, well, it could just go horribly wrong and everyone's looking at me?
I think there is a question here in relation to people's right to a family life and a private life. And people have a right to engage in relationships, and that right is, however, qualified, and it's qualified if there's a legitimate means for an employer interfering in that right. And I think where the company's interests are clearly bound up with how that relationship develops, the abuses of power we've talked about, then I think there is a legitimacy in terms of the company being involved. We have heard talk in America of actually contracts being signed, called sort of love contracts, where two employees say we are both consensually in this relationship. There is an equality of power. We haven't seen any of those in the UK as far as I'm aware, but that may be somewhere that employers seek to go, but it will have to be by contract. This is not a statutory mechanism. There's nothing that effectively the state wants to govern in relation to that side of things. But I think from a contractual point of view with senior employees, you can see employers putting in place these protections to just make sure that everyone's aware that the relationship's taking place and that it's taking place consensually and on equal terms.
Sam, back to you. I think we've all worked in places where someone's having a relationship and some of them end up being married. It happens in the BBC, happens everywhere I've worked. People have relationships. And you were talking about how you spot if it's real or not. And I kind of cut you off there, but go back to that. How do you spot if this is a real relationship, or is it because of proximity? You're with someone every day, you're sharing strife, you're sharing ups and downs. How do you tell?
Really good question. So how you tell is to make sure that you spend time with them as you would with any other romantic relationship outside the workplace, because only then do you really know what it means in the real world. that relationship. And secondly, it's about knowing what your own goals are. So, what sort of partner am I looking for? What sort of relationship am I looking for? And do they really tick the boxes on the whole? Obviously, some things are nice to have, some things are absolute deal breakers, and nobody's perfect. But ultimately, are you getting from this relationship what you want long term, or is it just a little fling? Because maybe the risks attached are just not worth it if it is short term. But definitely get it out of the workplace and into the real world so that you know what is really there.
Sam Owens, thank you. David Martyn, thank you. Imagine signing a contract.